First up is our community-based accountability system, Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir. Our first report this evening is going to be about the effort that staff has been working on for the past year on community-based accountability. And the intent is to be able to engage with our community to set our own standards in Fort Bend ISD about what success means and what student achievement means. So I'm going to ask our Chief Academic Officer, Deanna Saavedra, to begin the report.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. President of the Board of Trustees, and Dr. Dupree, good evening. As Dr. Dupree indicated, we're very proud this evening to share with you the work that we've done over the course of the year to develop our community-based accountability system. As Mr. Burdine indicated when he was recognizing Dr. Dupree, in Fort Bend ISD, we do believe in educating the whole child, and we know that our schools are about much more than test scores. So we've been hard at work in the development of our community-based accountability system. This evening's presentation will share the work that we've accomplished thus far. We'll share with you the next steps as we move forward with our pilot. And this evening, our presenters will be Stephanie Williams, our Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, and Audra Udi, our Executive Director of Accountability. Stephanie?
Good evening, Dr. Dupree.
I'm sorry, I don't think that microphone is working.
Good evening.
There you go.
Okay. Good evening, Dr. Dupree, members of the board. We want to start by giving you an overview of what you'll hear tonight in the presentation. We'll begin with background on how we got involved in community-based accountability, talk to you about the community-based accountability development process, the components of the framework, discuss the pillars that will be used in the pilot and also the signaling process, and then the timeline and 2019-20 work priorities moving forward. Beginning with the background, as you all know, TEA instituted the A through F accountability system, which places school ratings on one single test given at one time in the year. And as you know, in Fort Bend, we set our vision around student ownership of learning and developing students who exhibit the traits of the profile of a graduate. In short, Fort Bend is committed to developing students as well-rounded and productive citizens. Because of that, we know we cannot measure that on a single test. And in order to meet our commitment to our community and to our students, we have to transform the way that we look at accountability, our beliefs and our practices, so that students can achieve the futures that they deserve. In order to engage in this work, we needed to establish a strong team, and many of the members of the leadership team, the design team, and also our 6 pilot schools are here tonight to engage in this presentation. I'd like to have them stand at this time and be recognized for their contribution. So these stakeholders, along with other teachers, leaders, and community members, engaged in a process where the leadership team set the organizational learning goals and along with communication protocols, while the design team built the key questions and the elevator speech that you just saw, along with the signaling structure that'll be used in the pilot process. And the 6 pilot schools that we have, 3 middle schools, 1 high school, and 2 elementary, will utilize the work in order to do a campus needs assessment, and basically that will frame their campus improvement plan for this year and their signaling process throughout this pilot year. The components of the community-based accountability framework were defined by the Texas Public Accountability Consortium. They were defined so that we had a standard for community-based accountability across the state of Texas. They are comprised of the 7 pillars of effective schools that set the standard for what good work in effective schools looks like. The pilot sunburst defines the key questions, or said better, it is to what we will hold ourselves accountable within the district. The signaling process is a process that we will use to show if we were on track or if schools need support on the pathway to the anticipated outcomes for students. The accountability engine defines the evidence that we will accept that we're reaching our goal for students, the vision for students having the profile, the attributes of the profile, and also defines the strategy that we'll use. And finally, the Hopes and Dreams protocol establishes a community partnership to align what the school wants to do for kids with what our community says is important to them for their kids to achieve. When you take a look at the 7 pillars of effective schools, it's important to know that these were established by 43 schools who are a member of TPAC, the Texas Public Accountability Consortium. And what they did is they made a list of all the things that great schools do, and they began to categorize it. And what they noticed was that there are really 7 pillars on which all of the work that effective schools do rest. Obviously, we all know that we're committed to student achievement, and what that means for us is growth and progress for each one of our students. Things like what Mr. Gwynn talked to you about tonight about budget allocations also fit within these pillars, and student engagement and the learning opportunities that we've been focusing on most recently would fit within these pillars. The reason that TPAC defined a standard set of pillars that would be used by schools across the state who are engaging in community-based accountability is so that when we approach the legislators and say that this is a better system, we want to have a standard by which all districts would be held accountable, and these pillars are the ones that we're proposing. Along with the pillars is what is described as the accountability engine, and it's what the work that is done to hold ourselves accountable to the outcomes that we believe our students deserve. The way that we do that work is we look at what we're trying to accomplish, we define what evidence we would accept that we're doing that, and we outline the strategy that will take us on the path towards those outcomes. One of the pillars around community-based accountability deals with community partnerships. And I know that's a really important focus that we have in Fort Bend. The Hopes and Dreams protocol allows our district to engage with stakeholders all the way from students to parents to community members and ask a very simple question. What are the hopes and dreams that you have for our students? You ask that question in a series of roundtable events, and what happens is quite inspiring. This spring, we were able to engage 3 feeder patterns in this discussion, and our students and our families and our community members shared with us what was important to them. And I know that you'll see that many of the things that they're saying are the things that we're talking about every day, both in the boardroom, in our departments, and in our classrooms across Fort Bend. They would like students to have engaging, relevant, interactive learning. They would like us to develop non-academic life skills. They would like for us to ensure that students have post-high school success. And most importantly, they're invested in the socio-emotional learning and mental well-being of our students. These hopes and dreams meetings will continue throughout the fall as we engage the remaining feeder patterns. And that will culminate into a district sunburst like what you see here. And what we mean by sunburst is if you look along the outside, you see each pillar represented with a set of key questions. An example of a key question is, to what degree do students own and show responsibility for their learning? That aligns to one of our board goals. What you see in the gray is the alignment to the profile of the graduate and the board goals, and eventually we'll be able to align each one of those key questions to questions that the community also said was important to them for students. We'll be able to see where some items were aligned to the profile, the board goals, and also the hopes and dreams of the community. The other thing that the sunburst does is it defines the relationship that schools have to key questions. When we think of that relationship, we want to think of running, growing, and transforming work. So when we run work, we say that we have it up and running and we're getting the outcome that we want, and we can continue with the strategy that we have. When we grow work, we have to make transitional moves, maybe expansion or a greater level of support. And most importantly, when we transform work, we have to make a major change. And when a school identifies, as you see here in orange, their relationship to a key question as a major change, that's their indication to us as a district that that's the focus for them to get the greatest outcome for students. Once the relationship to the key questions is identified, we must have a signaling process that we engage in so that schools can let us know when they're on track, when they are making adjustments internally, when they require an additional layer of support to reach the anticipated outcome, or when there is a crisis and a significant amount of support is needed. And a sample is shown here on the page. It has been an amazing opportunity to lead this work in Fort Bend alongside the stakeholders that you saw represented here tonight, because community-based accountability allows us a pathway to recognizing the great work in schools in Fort Bend. This time, I want to turn the presentation over to Audra, who will be taking over the leadership of this work and who will outline for you the work going forward.
Good evening, and thank you, Stephanie, for all of the work this past year as we get community-based accountability in place. This evening, what I'd like to share with you is the proposed timeline for implementation. If you will, segment the top half of the chart as kind of the district timeline of events that need to occur to get a full rollout of community-based accountability to affect all of our campuses. And then the bottom half of the chart represents the process that an individual campus would go through in order to fully implement community-based accountability. And so the 6 pilot campuses that were mentioned earlier have been working through the 0-year learning in the past semester during the spring, and will be ready for year 1 implementation this year. So the 0 year, if you will, involves laying the foundation about what community-based accountability is, and it involves learning about the pillars and becoming to understand the key questions that have been designed by the design team. So they first kind of dig in and start figuring out what this is. Then start discussing where are we in relationship to these questions and tinkering around with it a bit, if you will, so that they can figure out what key questions are most important for them to address and to learn from through this pilot process. So year 1 will be 1920 for the 6 pilot campuses to really work basically in 2 pillars and several key questions within those pillars, and then do the signaling system throughout the year so that by August of 2020, we can do a report based on the work that's been done in those couple of pillars with the pilot campuses. In addition to that, line 2, cohort 2, would represent a new group of campuses coming in and doing the initial learning. So they would learn about community-based accountability, start playing around with the pillars and the key questions, if you will, and getting their initial relationships to those key questions established. And then the following year, they would begin to implement those 2 pillars. What will also be happening simultaneously is that once the pilot campuses move into their second year, they will build out from 2 pillars into all pillars. And so this multi-year timeline represents bringing in basically 3 cohorts. The first is the pilot group, a secondary group, and then the rest of the campuses, building out through 23-24, so that we have full implementation of all pillars and can be reporting our relationship to all of the key questions under those pillars. What we also need to do in order to help further that rollout into the next year is that during the spring we were able to conduct the first 3 feeder pattern hopes and dreams protocols with multiple stakeholders from each of the campuses within the feeder pattern, and that involves students, parents, community members, and educators. And so what we will continue doing in the fall to help support the rollout of this work is continue through the 8 other high school feeder patterns to gather the information necessary from the community to have them directly involved in the rollout of community-based accountability. So it's developing an understanding, but it's also accepting their input about what is important to them that we do for students. Thank you. All right, so the work priorities for 2019-20 involves the continuing implementation with the 6 pilot campuses. The second feature that we are working on building out at this point in time is that we wish to develop a design team to begin to work with our operational departments. So, for example, transportation, nutrition, finance, human resources, et cetera, and develop out the rest of the key questions that are necessary to support the operational departments within the district. So beginning that design work during the year and seeing what the relationship is to the key questions for each of those departments so that we get full district-wide implementation over the next several years. Then we also have mentioned that we'll continue the feeder pattern protocol with the rest of the feeder pattern campuses, which involve 8 feeder patterns. We'll continue what we call the communication matrix and tools. In other words, the elevator speech that we mentioned earlier and other communication pieces to help begin to expose the entire community to what community-based accountability is and gain buy-in around this type of accountability versus the state accountability. And then organizational learning. So we will not remain static while the pilot campuses are doing their work or while we're rolling out to the next cohort of campuses. We'll actually be continuing the learning with all of our campuses around what community-based accountability is, and also working with all employees throughout the district and stakeholders from the community related to the operational departments. And then finally, one of the things that we're piloting this year as well is that the 6 pilot campuses are helping us design and implement a new campus improvement planning process. So their campus improvement plans will look very different than all of the other campuses that have not yet come into community-based accountability, which will give us an opportunity to test it out and to refine it so that we can use it as future campuses come in to community-based accountability. And we will be developing out the reporting structure this year so that by August 2020, we can report based on the pillars and the work that was done in the 6 pilot campuses. Thank you. Finally, we ask that the board continue with us as partners in this by learning about community-based accountability and providing feedback on the process so that we can refine and define it the way that we want community-based accountability to work for Fort Bend ISD. And then by the time we finish up the pilot with the 6 campuses this year, we'll want to seek approval from the board on the pillars and the signaling process and timeline that will be used for implementation. At this time, we would like to entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Udi and Mrs. Williams. We have a few questions here. Mr. Rice. Was it? Okay. Mr. Rosenthal, I'm sorry. I couldn't see which one of you put it up. Mrs. Taussand.
Thank you guys for bringing this to us. I think it's timely as we're getting ready to have conversations about STAR testing and outcomes and that kind of thing. So I think it's critically important that this information get out into our community and what we're trying to do for our students. It's been in the works for a while, and so I, for one, am really glad to see the pilot schools, and I want to thank all of you here who have engaged. My youngest daughter goes to Ronald Thornton Middle School, and so I know we've been one of the pilot schools, and it's very exciting for me as a parent and as a board member, so I just wanted to say that at the outset. I also want to thank Mrs. James for representing the board. She's been part of the design team and has been instrumental in making sure that the board's priorities are met and are considered at every turn, and the Vision and Planning Committee has had the benefit of having some of those updates, and so we really appreciate that, because I think it's really important that the board interests and the board concerns and thoughts and all of those be represented throughout. So I wanted to say that as well. So communication is really, it's been a priority to this board. It's particularly a priority to me. So my first question is around communication and what that's going to look like and how we're going to be getting that out there, and when are we ready to start using some of the components that the pilot schools have put in place to have this conversation when we do start discussing state accountability.
Okay, part of the work of the design team was to come up with a concise elevator speech that we could all use no matter where we're talking about community-based accountability. So that's one low-hanging piece of fruit, if you will, that is a part of the communication plan. But we've also been working with the design team to determine who are some key players in the community and the state who need to be more aware of the community-based accountability, and what is the messaging that we need to consistently provide to all of those stakeholders. And then part of the communication that is being handled through the TPAC group as well that we've been working with is that we're trying to be strategic in asking certain legislators or other key players in the state to be involved in some of the work where appropriate, so that they get a deeper understanding, and when it comes time to come back and petition the state about a better way, that we already have some individuals who are more knowledgeable and can help clear the way for that message.
So I think that's good, and I think that that's important that we, that our representatives and senators not only understand but are part of the process. I think that that's great. One of the things that I think I just want to put out there, we can, sometimes what we do in this boardroom is not always easily understood in our community. So the thing I'm envisioning, like I always love community impact and community impacts infographics, and they tend to take step by step and explain, you know, what it is we're doing and why it is we're doing it. So I just want us to be thinking about that and be really purposeful to make sure that we break it down and make it very simple so that it's not ambiguous, it's not this abstract concept, and we let the community know what it is that we're trying to do here and why it's good for kids. And because, you know, sometimes it can be really complex when you just look at the words on the paper. So that would be one suggestion. And I do think it's important that we go ahead and start educating them now on what maybe just the basics, because we've done some of that in our vision and planning committees and meetings, and it has been helpful to walk through some of that. And so I think it's going to be really important to start now. Otherwise, when we start putting some of this out there, they're not even, I'm afraid people are not even going to fully understand what it is we're talking about or why it is we're doing it.
I wanted to offer one more piece of the communication that is critical. I know that Audra and Stephanie both mentioned the Hopes and Dreams protocol, and a big piece of that protocol is an introduction with John Tanner on what community-based accountability is and why it's important for us to develop a different system. And so he does a wonderful job of introducing that prior to engaging the community in giving us the feedback that they have regarding their hopes and dreams. So that's one small piece, but it's a very nice introductory piece to lay the foundation as we begin to build some of the communication pieces that you've suggested.
Right, and so that's good. I think that's good. And it's real easy. I know the parents who are in the room, it's real easy for us to see why STAR doesn't cut it, and why there's more to educating our kids than that, and we should be doing more. So I just think we need to make sure that parents understand where we're coming from. My last question is about, so in the slide 14, you talk about the board engaging and learning, and so going back to what we've done in vision and planning, I feel like we've done, those of us on that committee have been able to do some of that. But I want to know for the rest of the board what that's going to look like to ensure that everyone else is brought up to speed. And I think this is an excellent thing, too, for a board brief. I'll just say that now in order to break it down. But just to ensure that all of our board members not only understand but are on board with it.
Sure. One of the things we have discussed with John Tanner for this next year is finding, in the next couple of months or a few weeks, finding a time that might be appropriate for the board to have interaction with him around community-based accountability and an appropriate method that suits your needs in order for that conversation to happen. So we just need to find an appropriate time and method for doing that work.
Thank you. Thank you both for all your work.
Thank you, Mrs. Taussand. Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you. So I'm very supportive of this in general. I think this is critical that we have developed some alternative. And I know in the update that this was presented in this past week, there was a statement from Mr. Morath, I believe, who I still can't believe I can't believe he really thinks this. Okay, I just can't, because he seems like a pretty intelligent guy, okay? But he believes that the STAR test is a good predictor of life's outcomes.
That is what he said.
I gotta believe he really didn't say that. I just... And so if that's the attitude, I don't think there's a parent in this community that would say, yeah, that's probably true. I can't see that. So, again, I'm very supportive of this, and I like how you're kind of going through this very methodically. I wish we could speed it up, and I realize we can't. So I have a couple of comments. So, in your hopes and dreams conversations with communities, were students invited to that, and did we get feedback from them?
Yes, students were very well represented. We started by having people at mixed tables, and then in the end, each group was given a colored dot so that we could recognize what was important to students versus what was important to parents versus community members, so we'd be able to triangulate the data.
Were you surprised by any of the input that you got from students?
I wasn't surprised, Mr. Rosenthal, but I wished every educator could be there to hear them talking so passionately about what they want from their education.
Is there anything, like maybe one thing that you could hit on that really registered with you?
I think one of the biggest things that went across feeder patterns is offering multiple pathways for students to find their passion and achieve success. Our students understand that they're not cookie cutter factory workers anymore. They know that they need opportunities to explore what they like in order to make the critical decisions for their future.
Sounds good. That's good. Okay. And the reason that I asked that is because I went to a presentation at TASB this past week from San Marcos ISD, so they were just kind of showing about how they were getting community feedback, and a lot of it was really with the input from a lot of students, and they were really surprised by some of what they heard. So I'm glad that we're doing that. And then I assume that in the pilot, it's the first two pillars that you're starting with?
We actually ask campus principals to work with their staffs to identify the pillars that would allow for the most change toward the outcomes that they were seeking. And so you won't see that they're all in the same pillar, although many were around student learning and progress, but there were some outside.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. And thank you, Ms. Williams. I just wanted to comment and say that I'm glad. How many school districts are working on this are we working with?
So we started in year one with 60. There are 43 that committed to the pilot year, and now we're in small groups with school districts who hope to accomplish the same thing, and we're working in that manner.
Okay, so 43. That's good. And now that I think about it, I think it's better that we do this than try to develop one on our own, because every time we call on our legislators and they say, well, how would you do it then? And now we have some backup for that. And I'm really glad that it's aligned with profiles of a graduate. And I agree that we can't use one single test to a test should be a diagnostic tool. So we're not opposed to being held accountable for student achievement, but we're opposed to a single test that's used to judge and then label a student. And how soon do you think we'll be able to have some information on how the pilot is working? Because I'd really like to push back on children at risk who judge and then label every school, every elementary school, every middle school, every high school in Region 4. We have about 40 districts, and I recall there are over 900 elementary schools in Region 4, just to use that as an example. And they give each one, they rank each one 1 through 932 and give each one A through F ranking, and they have never once set foot in a classroom. And when they do that, I really don't know what their motive is, but I think they commit a grave injustice to our students, our teachers, our parents, and our community. And there is nothing more than I would like to do than to throw this in their teeth and make them put up or shut up with their bogus ranking of every school district based on socioeconomic status and results of a STAR exam. So when do you think we would have something that we can...
Well, for asking it in that manner. During the
Like it in the
pilot,
form of a
as part of
ball.
our work with TPAC, the other 7 school districts that we're partnered with have the same goal. They didn't word it quite the same way that you did, but they definitely want to identify what a reporting structure would look like. So the pilot will begin signaling in August, and we're hoping that we'll have a frame of a reporting structure for that by the end of this school year in working with those other districts to identify criteria.
All right. Thank you. I'll stop now.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mrs. Helliger?
We're going to make sure that we give the results of this as weapons for you to throw. I'm also excited about the progress that you are making and us being a part of this, so I'm really excited about that. One of the things, as I was listening to you, and I'm thinking about my own child and the young people that I work with, they're not traditional. They're not like, some of us are a little older, you stick to one thing and you're going to do this for it. You're stuck to accounting. You're stuck to this. You're stuck to that. They're not going to do that. And kids and students, I don't want to say kids, but students like to have the ability to have those options and to touch and to feel and to explore. And we start our youngest of children, looking at different things to give them the opportunity to figure out what they want to become and expose them to different things. And when we look at those children at risk ratings, and someone sent me something off of Facebook recently, I guess it was posted for some of our schools that were right close to some of our schools that got D's and maybe some F's that were right close to some of those schools that were A's and B's. And it seemed to be there was a discussion around economics. Does economics totally play into that? And does it play into it? Absolutely. Does the STAR test tell me that I'm going to be successful? No, even if I get that A. Does the STAR test tell me that I'm not going to be successful even if I flunk? No. I bet you if I polled everyone in this room of how many tests they have failed and look and see where they are today in their careers or in their lives, and I bet you that whatever test that was back then, does not dictate where they are today. And so I'm excited about that. I mean, this process. I do want to say, when we looked at our CBAS pillars, and I know you said that the principals will have the ability to focus on their top 2. And as Ms. Tassan said, around the communication, because you all know communication is one of our top pillars. And so, and you mentioned the need to define who gets informed around the community. Just the basic RACI, I think, will be important for each one of these pillars, so that the community knows that these are the people that's responsible for the success of this particular pillar. The who's accountable for it, who do we communicate the successes and the failures and what we need. Those are RACI should be defined for each one of these pillars, because it could be different depending on the pillar. And especially when we talk about the community-based accountability system, students are a part of the community, the parents are part of the community, but there are stakeholders that are part of the community. And I know we've had some opportunity or some challenges with that in the past, of ensuring that we get the right group of people involved, consistently involved. Who's part of that? Who's that person or group of people that gets to be part of that community stakeholder group? That's not the parent, that's not the teacher. To say, hey, I'm supporting this particular community, because there's so many people that's concerned about our communities. I want to make sure that whatever we do in that particular area, that it is communicated effectively of who those people are. And that's why it goes back to that RACI, ensuring that we have that RACI defined so that it's clear to everybody what we're doing, what's the length of time that we're going to utilize these people or group. Is the group changing? I mean, even for the rest of them, are the different, focus groups, are they changing constantly? Just make sure everyone understands that process. And so that, someone might say, hey, I didn't get called this time, or why am I not continuing to get called? Those kinds of things, to have that continuity when it comes to this pilot. Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Hilliger. Mrs. James?
Thank you, Mr. Burdine, and thank you for a great presentation, and thanks. It was great to hear all the comments from the rest of the trustees. Mrs. Tossan, you're right. I've spent a lot of time with the design team. I've even done Schoology courses and given my opinion, and I really stretched it. So I'm in an environment of continuous improvement. I'm continuing to improve. I do want to say again, though, to the principals, there's several principals here, and not even half of them are represented here tonight. There's a tremendous team of principals that worked on this design team, and I just want to echo your appreciation for them, because not only are they exploring the unknown and putting themselves out there and their staff and their school, and they're going back to their schools and they're saying, okay, we're going to try this new thing. And that's a tough message, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your willingness to learn, and I appreciate your willingness to try new things and share ideas and get feedback. So those are for the pilot campuses, but also for those that were serving on the design team, because we were really exploring, and not everything we came up with was good or right, and then we recycled it and we came back and we looked at it again. And it was really great to see the team in action of just having some honest feedback and sorting through the questions and concerns. And it's just been a great process. So I want to acknowledge that and all the district leadership that's led that, and mostly the principals who've given up a day, a month or something or more sometimes to come and participate. I want to pick up on something Mr. Rice said, and that is the source for these pillars. So I feel like this is a really important thing that we get in the communication and in the messaging. These are not random things that we came up with. These are not somebody's good idea. This is the work of 43 districts coming together, sharing ideas, and this is what has come out of that. It's the foundation. We have to have belief in these things. It's the foundation for building the whole system. If we're questioning this, then none of it's going to work. So if we're going to educate our state legislators and our state senators, we have to start with this piece to help them to see that these are the key things. These are the pillars. These are the key things in education. And so that's a little aha that I had during this presentation. If you click on that slide again, you get the accountability engine up there, and what I love about this is the model of continuous improvement. I think, to me, this is number 2 thing that our state legislators need to understand. Like any business, like any organization, continuous improvement has to be at the heart. Of course, I love systems, and I've been talking about continuous improvement for 7 years. I've been on the school board, but I believe it because it's the only way to get better. And it's not about gotcha. It's not about now you have a label. We've put you in this box. It's about what's my relationship to this question? What evidence do I see around it? What changes can we make? What decisions can we make to improve? And so I think that's just a critical messaging piece. I also think that, so let's talk, 2 other things I want to bring up. One is the board's relationship to this. Into this community-based accountability system. In your last slide, you talked about the boards on the learning process, on the learning curve. Absolutely, I believe the board has to begin engaging in learning and understanding. We have started, and we've all participated in team building events where we've started on that curve, but we need to continue, because we need to understand when we see signals We need to know what it shows. We need to understand how to interpret it. We need, as a board, need to know what we can do with the information, what we should do with the information, what we shouldn't do with the information. And it's not that we don't want to be transparent, because we do, but we want to be sure to get that piece right in terms of what does it mean. I'm excited we're going to see some reflection in a few campus improvement plans coming forward, because I've been a big proponent of that for a while now, and I'm looking forward to that. I guess one other idea I wanted to just throw out there, I don't know if you've done it, I think there's been something done along this line, but I don't know. This is relating to, do we have some base data or some control data at all with our community's relationship to the questions that we can learn, that we can use to chart our growth? So sort of as Mrs. Tossan and Ms. Holliger, I think, were particularly saying, okay, so where are we in all of this? What does this look like? I kind of started to write down, well, what are some questions maybe, the community may relate to, some questions the students may relate to, and be able to give us a little bit of feedback or sort of some base data just on their interpretation. And then as we ask the questions of our organization and the leaders implement change, perhaps we can understand what type of change and growth we've seen. This is also builds on something Mr. Rosenthal has talked a lot about in the past, and that is surveying our stakeholders and understanding sort of where they fit in. So I'm just throwing that out there. The different questions might be appropriate for different groups, and I'm not saying we take all, I know there's lots and lots of questions, so I'm not saying we would use all the questions, but there might be a few that we could pull out and get some base data on. Do you want to respond to that?
Well, I did want to say that most of the other districts move to some sort of survey as they transition to community-based accountability in order to have just that checkpoint that you described.
Okay, well, that's good to know, and I would be excited to see something like that, so we can chart our growth, because it will lend credibility as we try to take this story out into the community. The last idea I had, I know that I said that was my last one, but it wasn't. There's one more, and that is I wrote down in terms of the board's learning, in terms of the community's learning, I think we might want to consider some kind of webinar or other type of electronic learning that I'm not saying it's a half-day event. I'm saying maybe it's an hour, or it's 30 minutes, or there's an introduction, and people can build on it, and we can maybe kind of mark sort of or keep track of what people do with that. And I mean, not that I'm going to speak for the board, but I think the board would be willing to try something like that, because having that type of learning and maybe understanding how that learning would be interacting with our community stakeholders is beneficial for us, because we can encourage community members to participate. So those are my ideas. They weren't questions, they were thoughts, and keep up the good work. Great job.
Thank you, Mrs. James. I'd like to echo what Mrs. Tossan said, and I know we can all agree that we do appreciate all your hard work, along with the team that was involved in this, and the community members, and the staff, and the students. I'm also excited, and I echo what everything was, what all of my fellow trustees up here have said. We know every legislative session, the box that we operate in continues to get smaller and smaller, and I'm really proud that we're taking the wheel and doing what's necessary to grow our students, which I think is just a huge part of this. And as a parent, I like that I will have the opportunity to best support my child with some real data, because I know as a parent that my children are not taking the STAR test yet, but next year my son will be, and I know it will not be a fair indicator for him. But one pillar that I'm really proud of that was really excited to see was the the safety and well-being. And if we're going to educate the whole student, then that is a huge part of them being comfortable and feeling safe and having a great sense of well-being. So I just wanted to comment that I'm really proud of that, and thank you for that.